the gate and sets up a chair and just waits. Days pass, weeks pass. Of course, he has to leave and go get something to eat, but this is his major preoccupation. He wants to see her again. His friends are angry at him, they're making fun of him, and it's getting tougher and tougher to be there because there's just no reward. And at a certain point he says, what is wrong with me? I used to have a life. I used to have fun. Now I just hang out at this gate. I need to just shake this woman's image off. And so he's like, I'm going to go all in, the partying life again. So he goes back and, and he's going to dig in. He's chasing girls, he's gambling at night, they're drinking all night, and he's investing full on. And he finds, no, it doesn't do it for him anymore. Nothing left but to go back to the gate. She's ruined life for him. So he goes back and he waits. And some more time passes, and finally he's rewarded. Again, kind of almost falling asleep, looking off into the distance. He's a little cloud again. And there's the sedan chair. And now his heart leaps in his chest, and he thinks, she must have come out. Man, I left the gate. She's come out. And so at some point while he was partying or something, she'd come out. Now she's coming back, and he's making ready. This is going to be his moment. He's just going to have one moment to declare his love for her. Because it's just that simple, right? Like all young men, when he feels something for a young woman, he thinks that his feelings imply her own. So all he has to do is declare his passion for her, thinking nothing of the possible problems involved with loving a princess when you're basically a beggar from the gutter. Undaunted. Waits, the chair comes. The big men, they set the chair down, the curtain parts, and she steps out, and he does something very inadvisable. He leaps at her and crashes at her feet and takes the hem of her dress and kisses it and says, "Princess, my love, when can we be together?" Of course she's startled for a moment and looks back, but she's a princess raised to, in the diplomatic life and how to answer every situation. She looks down and she sees this rough young man in rags at her feet, collects herself, and she says, "In the cemetery." Just to say, not in this lifetime, buddy. And next thing he knows, he feels powerful hands grabbing his shoulders and his clothes, and he's being launched. Crashes to the ground, rolls, gets up smiling. Looks, she's disappeared into the gate, and he's so happy. He says, "In the cemetery. My God, we can be alone there. The dead have no eyes. My love is smart as well as beautiful." And he heads off to the cemetery. So he rushes to the cemetery, enters the gates, and immediately starts to look around for the most advantageous place to make love in the cemetery. So biggest headstone, throwing the most shade maybe, and he walks the entire perimeter, all through it, looking for the best space. Whenever he thinks he's found a spot, he finds it's not quite good enough. He cleans one spot, makes a little bed there. Finally, after hours, he's found what he thinks is the best spot. Sits down to wait. Waits, and waits, and waits. And evening comes on. And it finally occurs to him, it's probably not so easy for her to get away. Her father must watch her like a hawk. I had to wait weeks, months to see her the first time. I may have to wait again. It's all right. I could do that. So he settles in. He's not going to leave the cemetery now. He's learned his lesson. You can't, not keep watch. And so what he has to do is he can go to the perimeter of the cemetery and beg of people as they pass by for some food. And this pretty much works. And he's getting by this way, and he's spending his days in the cemetery, and he doesn't just want to sit there, so he starts walking around. And he looks at the headstones, and he reads them, and he thinks about the lives of these people. He sees people come and go from the cemetery, and he starts to think about the conversations that he's overhearing. And he begins to realize, this person died very young. This person lived to old age. This young woman died of a disease. This one in an accident. He overhears people talking about their love, some that they've brought to bury, and he watches them in tears. And he overhears people say things like, "Oh, my husband, he was so handsome. He was such a handsome man. I love him so much." Other people say, "Oh, she was so beautiful when she was young." And he thinks about these things, and he thinks, boy, that old woman who's talking about her handsome husband, and she clearly still, loved him to the end, but he must no longer have been handsome by the time they reached the age she is now. And the young woman, that had been beautiful in her youth, and yet her husband is mourning her sincerely, and he lived with her to old age. She must have been not so beautiful by the end, and yet he loves her still. And it occurs to him that his princess could get old. And there might come a time when she's not so beautiful. And he begins to wonder, will I love my princess when she's no longer beautiful? And it starts a train of thought where he wonders, what is it that I'm in love with? Is it her beauty? And what does that mean when the beauty changes? Will I love her still? What's the source of beauty and what's the source of love? Where do these things come from? Why am I so inspired? And the weeks are passing, and he begins to think, well, the source of beauty must be God. God's obviously the source of everything. It seems like a simple answer to him. God's the source of everything. God must be the source of beauty, the source of love. And he thinks, well, then, what then is God's beauty? He's heard this phrase, God is beautiful and loves beauty, this hadith. What must God's beauty be like? And he's straining his mind to conceive of God's beauty. And he thinks, is it like flowers? Is it like flowers? No, it can't be like flowers. Is it like a woman? Maybe. That seems like a good idea to him. He says, but it's too small. It's just like a woman carrying flowers. It's like an evening sky, and he starts to go through all these possibilities of all the beautiful things, and he starts to look for beautiful things around him. There's even there's a beauty to the disorder of the old cemetery, too, and the antiqued look of the stones. That has a beauty. And he thinks, no, it can't be any one of those things. It must be all of those things. And so now he closes his eyes and starts to bring together all of the aspects of beauty that are in his mind and all the things that he's seen that are beautiful, and starts to arrange them together and bring them together in a great vision of the totality of being and all beauty that it could possibly exist. And then he falls into a rapture and a bliss. And he's lost in that state. And while he's lost in that state, someone comes by and sees him like this and leaves a little food in front of him. Because as the weeks and months have been passing while he's caught up in these reveries and these meditations on the source of beauty and the nature of love and what it means to be in love, all the while never forgetting his princess's face, because there's got to be a reason for being there. She's what's keeping him there. He's waiting patiently. But as the weeks have been passing, people have been seeing him there all the time. And at first, he would walk the perimeter or walk to the gate so that he could be near people that passed by the cemetery, so he could beg food or beg a little change, that he could exchange for food. He could send, some kid to the market to bring him back something. But as he was more and more absorbed in his meditation on beauty, he would walk in and around the cemetery, and people would see him there, and they would think, oh, he must be somebody who's doing a penance. Because in that time, if you'd done something over which you felt profound guilt, you would head out on the road or head to the cemetery and live there as a kind of penance for the kind of thing over which you felt profound guilt, to punish yourself almost in a way, to live in exile because you had done something that made you feel as if you had to live outside of society and you had to pay a debt. And so people would go to cemeteries or be intentionally homeless and walk the roads and live off the charity of others as a way of humbling themselves. And so people assumed, since he was always in the cemetery, he must be doing a penance. And so they would bring him food, as somebody who's doing a penance. But the longer he was there, and the more he would sit down in front of a stone and seem to be lost in these meditations, the more and more people began to think, no, maybe he's not doing a penance. Maybe he's a holy man. He looks like a holy man. His beard is growing. It's getting longer. He's just absorbed in this state. They have no idea he's thinking about the princess. But he's got to focus. And so now they begin to very humbly bring food offerings, and they lay them and bow their heads, and they lay them before him very humbly. Sometimes they walk away, and sometimes they remain until he opens his eyes. And when he does open his eyes, he's been thinking profound thoughts about the nature of life and beauty and love. And he looks up and he's a little surprised to see somebody there. And that person might say, Mola, Master, I've been struggling with a question. Or my daughter is sick. Or some question like this. And by now he's become a thoughtful person. And so when he's asked a question, he says, wow, let me think about that. Come back tomorrow. I want to think about that, and we'll talk. And so they'll come back and they'll talk, and he'll have really thought about it, because he doesn't have anything else to do. That's entertainment. Or when somebody says, my daughter's sick, he doesn't know why they're asking him, or why they're telling him, but he thinks, my God, they could lose their daughter like these other parents I've seen in here come bearing a child. It breaks my heart for them. And he says, may it be well with her. And they smile and they walk away with that blessing. And the strange thing is, the blessings seem to work. As far as he knows, he's just moved. And he said, may it be well with you. But the blessings are working. Now, meanwhile, back at the palace, the princess's life has gone on, and she does what princesses do. She is married off in a marriage of diplomacy to a prince from elsewhere. And in this case, that prince from elsewhere is invited into the palace to live there. And it's not so bad. It's a marriage of diplomacy, but it's a good one. And they find that they're compatible, and that they like and respect one another, and that liking and respect grows into a love. And it's really the best possible situation for such a marriage, such an arranged marriage. And she's happy with her husband. But she has one great pain in her life. And that's that they do not conceive. And when they do conceive, she can't seem to carry the child to term. And this is the pain of her life. That she so badly wants to have a child and cannot seem to have one. And being a princess, she has access to the best health care. The best doctors. And consults all of them. And none of the local doctors can help. And so her father and her husband, they send, to far regions to bring the best doctors from elsewhere, the ones that have written great medical treatises and seem to know all the various ways of bringing about a pregnancy through difficult circumstances. And none of it works. So now it's consulting the wise women of the city and the various people who know how to make certain potions. And she consults with all the people that know the remaining indigenous medicines and ways. And none of that works. And finally, she tries the charlatans with their snake oil and anything that anybody says will work, and none of that works. And finally, watching her in desperation and ready to give up hope, her maidservant says, "Mistress, I hate to see you this way. I love you so much. And it's never been my place to say anything to a great lady like you about what you should do about this problem, but I can't watch you like this anymore without saying something. And I need to tell you that we who live in this city, when we have a problem like yours, or any such problem, we take it to the saint of the cemetery. There's a man that lives in the cemetery, and he's been there for years now. And when we need a blessing, we go, he gives a very simple blessing, and the blessings work. Or if we need advice about what to do, he talks to us, and it works. I think you should go to see the saint of the cemetery. Which is, of course, anything. But the princess just can't go to the cemetery. So she says, "Give me your clothes." And so they trade clothes, and she puts on the maidservant's clothes and veils herself, and with 2 great guards is escorted to the cemetery at dusk, as evening's coming on. And she enters the cemetery, and the guards withdraw, and she walks up and stands right in front of the saint of the cemetery and says, "Mola, Master." And he opens his eyes and he says, "My princess, you've come, you've kept your promise." And she's taken aback. She says, "How can you know this? How can you know I'm the princess?" She's covered head to toe in maidservant's garments, and she's got her face covered. All he's done is looked into her eyes. He says, "How could I not know you?" He says, "It's your face that's been before me all of these years. And now you've kept your promise. And I want to thank you. Because, my love, it's because of you that I understand what the nature of this love is that I feel for you. And in your absence, I've learned what the source of beauty is, and how I can never lose my connection to this love. And at this point, I exist in it. And I love you for that." And he says, "But princess, nobody comes to me happy. No one comes here happy. Please tell me, what is your pain?" And she says, "I'm heartbroken. I love my husband, and we can't conceive a child, and it's been years now. And I've come to you for a blessing." And he says, his heart breaking for her, because this is the woman he's loved all these years. And to look at her heartbroken breaks his heart. And he says, "If there's any merit in anything I've done in this life, may it be transformed into a blessing for you, that you should have a child. May it be transformed into love that will give birth to a child." And she goes away. And he turns back within and begins to turn his inward gaze on the source of beauty, and is absorbed deeper and deeper into the bliss of the vision of this inward beauty. And she's gone away, and meanwhile conceived a child. And she carries it to term. And becomes absorbed in that process, and is excited, but each day is cautious, because she's been pregnant before, but at different stages she's lost the child. And so every day she's cautious, not knowing if it's really worked, if it's really will hold. And then when the pregnancy really seems to be holding, then there's the excitement, and she's caught up in the excitement, and no longer thinks about the saint of the cemetery. And back there in the cemetery, people are noticing that he seems to be deeper in samadhi than usual. And they're noticing that the food that's been left has not been touched. And then more time is passing, and the food is becoming desiccated. And finally, somebody cautiously goes to put a hand just under his nostrils. And they find that he's not breathing, that he'd become absorbed in the source of beauty and passed out of this world. 9 months has passed, and the princess gives birth. And when the child is healthy enough, she remembers the saint of the cemetery. And with her guards, goes and wants to take her child now to the saint of the cemetery for a blessing for health, that he should be well for his whole life, that he should grow up healthy. and finds that where he used to sit, there's a rough kind of grave marker. And she asks around it and finds that he's died. And she sincerely mourns this lover and holds him in her heart. And as she raises her child, she's waiting for the day that he'll be old enough to take to the cemetery. And so when her boy is some 6 or 7 years old, she takes him to the cemetery on his birthday and tells him the story of the love that made his birth possible.
So, welcome. Welcome to this weekend of exploring the passion and intimacy and beauty and heartbreak that we all experience in our time here on Earth. Nathaniel first read that story to me when we first met. And it has been the source of a conversation that we started all those years ago. So being in this room with all of you and with the people that are joining us via live stream, this is our chance to actually explore this story to its nth degree and to feel ourselves really, well, to feel the magic of it, because I think right now what we feel is the magic of this story. So we're excited about this weekend, particularly in terms of exploring this sweet little book called Rasa Shastra. And in thinking about where to start, we felt that what Murshid has to say, Hazrat Inayat Khan has to say about passion is a good starting point. So I'm going to read some of his words just as a way of kind of setting the foundation of where we're going to be going over the weekend. When one considers the nature of passion, one sees that it is life itself. It is energy taking substantial form and expressing itself through different channels and outlets. Different desires such as speaking, singing, dancing, laughing, crying, fighting are different expressions of the same energy, whose central or final expression takes place in the passion between lovers. Passion is seen in the pairings of speaker and listener, thinker and receiver, or actor and spectator. But it appears most vital and most strong in the love of the lover and the response of the beloved. We can really see that in the story of the Source of Beauty. The passion of the actor proclaims their part. The act of creation, in whatever aspect, is the play of passion. I think play is going to be an important part of what we do over the weekend. Whose source and root is in love alone. For as a person without humanity is empty, and as the body without spirit is dead, so passion without love is energy devoid of beauty and blind. Passion is the desire of love. Passion is the expression of love, and it is the satisfaction of love. It is no exaggeration to say that passion is the end of love. Human life is composed of many lives, and the circle of each is completed when the passion that inspires each is satisfied. All things in life have a purpose. The purpose of some is known, and of others unknown. Beyond and beneath life exists that activity which the limited mind cannot comprehend. But so far as human understanding can probe, it can discover nothing of greater purpose and value to the world than passion. Under the covering is hidden the hand of the Creator. The great teachers of humanity have therefore wished us to look upon every expression of passion as sacred, and as most sacred, that passion which exists in the love of the sexes for each other. But if this world is the work of a creator, it has been created so that God might experience external life. In other words, the knowing aspect of life has wished to know the knowable part of life. The knowing aspect of life has wished to know the knowable part of life. Its joy depends on knowing, which alone comes through experience. Moreover, its evolution and development depend on the inspiration which is brought by experience alone. And inasmuch as it is necessary for the knowing aspect of life or the soul to return at length to its original state of being, even so it is necessary for it to experience first of all the life it created, for the very reason that it might know. Our weekend with you is about this process of experience, that we, as he says, get to know the life for the very reason that it might be known. So that's what we're hoping that we'll do over our time together. We wanted to take a little bit of time to actually just talk about the book itself and how we're going to approach the material in the book this evening, and then to maybe hear a little bit from you about what brought you here, what was the calling that brought you here. So, do you want to tell us about this book?
That reading's a good example of the approach that Hazrat Inayat Khan takes, where he's basically saying, passion is the force that drives the entire universe. Elsewhere he says that love is the most powerful thing in the universe, that love is a power. And what he's describing is that there's this thing just driving the universe in the raw form. And its most beautiful expression is in the passion between two lovers. That's where it can become most conscious and reach its highest degree of sophistication and beauty. And so, with this idea in mind, and this is a very Sufi idea, he gave a series of talks. It appears probably some of his earliest talks around the World War I period. So somewhere between 1914 and 1918, he gave a series of talks that were called Sex, and on different aspects of relationship. And these talks were then transcribed, and they were to be one of the earliest publications of his kind of burgeoning organization, which had created a small printing press. It was going to be called the Sufi Press. And in London, they had slated to make this one of their earliest publications, a little book called Sex, somewhere during World War I. And then what you might expect happened, someone thought this was way too risque, and the whole project got tabled. And tabled beyond his lifetime. He died in 1927, and it was not till 1938 that the book actually came out under a different title, Rasa Shastra. So 11 years after his death. But I think it's fascinating that he thought this was among the most important topics to teach about in the earliest part of his teaching career. About different kinds of relationships, monogamous relationships, polygamous relationships, different examples of how sexuality can be perverted or distorted. It's amazing. It's amazing the range of things that he wanted to discuss. And he's discussing interracial marriage. And I think we have to remember that he was involved in one. And so it might have been very important to him to talk about these things. That to all eyes in that time, he would have been a black man marrying a white woman. He'd married an American Caucasian woman, and she basically had to escape from her family, and meet him outside of the United States and where they were married. And so he was already involved in a radical relationship, and he spends a good portion of a chapter talking about cross-cultural marriages and interracial marriages and how this happens and what the value is and what the problems are. So I think this must have been very important to him to talk about. But not published until after he's gone, and under this title, Rasa Shastra, and we're not sure exactly how it got the title. It may be that one of his brothers gave it this title. But it's appropriate. It's Sanskrit, and he was an Indian Sufi master, and so it's appropriate to use this language. A Shastra is a word that means, a Shastra is a manual or a treatise. It can be used either way. And rasa is a gorgeous word in Sanskrit, because there's not one word you can use to translate it. Rasa is nectar, the juice of life, the sweetness. It's emotion, but sweet emotion. It's delicate. It's flavor. And it most often occurs in a phrase in Sanskrit, rasa lila. Lila. And rasa lila is a phrase that's most often associated with Krishna and Radha. And this kind of illicit love between them. Because Radha is a woman that can't be Krishna's, but they love one another. And the love is heightened by the difficult circumstances of not being able to have one another. And the cycle of stories about their love is often described as Rasa Lila, the sweet play between them. Lila is play. So there's a sweet play between them, there's delicate romance and a dance. And all of that is implied when you use the word rasa. Rasa Shastra is also a technical term. When you say Rasa Shastra, it's a reference to alchemy. To an alchemical process of transmutation, transmuting one thing into another. And it might be seen in this case of transmuting what begins as raw attraction into that more delicate gold of divine love, or love, which is itself divine. So the book is divided into a number of chapters that cover a wide variety of subjects, but begins with principles And this is what seems to be most important to him, to lay down principles that accomplish this transformation. And then he gives many, many examples from the culture he knows, from the Sufi tradition, from the Indian tradition. And maybe you can say a little more about how to contextualize the way we're using the text.
So there's so many ways to approach the material in this book, and we really decided that what we wanted to do was to share these principles with you and to see what they mean to each one of us, wherever we are in our relationships with each other, with a lover. And I think it's really important, just the idea of that this book came out 80 years ago. So if we are to imagine what the world is going to look like 80 years from now, some of the ways and language that is used in this book from 80 years ago feels very archaic. Some of the ways in which the relationships between genders is talked about feels very archaic. And yet, if I put myself 80 years from now, I'm very much hoping that if people listen to our conversation, they will also see it as archaic. And I say that because hopefully equality, diversity, the level of kind of evolution of relationships will have moved so much further. So I'm inviting us to, as we look at this, the language of this, to sort of bear that in mind. And to help us with that, what we've done is we've selected passages, particularly the ones that sort of struck us as conveying the kind of essence of the different subjects in Rasa Shastra. And those are the ones that we're going to be sharing with you at the beginning of each session. So just as we've done with Passion, now you'll get other bits from the book that we've kind of looked at and honed. And alongside that sharing of his thinking about this, as we saw in the passage in Passion, what he's talking about is actually we can only know something through the experience of it. And that's individual to each one of us, wherever we are in our journey. So the other part of our work together will be to find what does this matter to me? What does this passage say? Where am I with this? Where do I want to go with this? So that our time will sort of be divided between that kind of sharing of dialogue of these passages and also having some time to really sort of think about where we want to go. Do you want to say anything else on that?
Yeah. Just that, in rereading this text, I read it many, many years ago, and I thought it was fascinating then. But now, rereading it, I think it's revolutionary. And you have to you have to read it two ways. One, you have to look at the deep structure of what he's saying. And you look at the deep structure where you can see the principles of what he's saying, and you see how extraordinary it is. But then if you look at certain individual examples that are born out of the culture in which he was raised, they may not apply to us so well. But nevertheless, I think this is a text that is way beyond its time, but still written in its time. So it uses language of its time, but the ideas go well beyond.
I was thinking about the impact of listening to Netanel tell the story, and I can still feel it resonating in my heart. And I know that my heart is already starting to become tender and is curious about I'm curious about what my heart is wanting to reveal over this time. But that requires the kind of softness. So I also just wanted to say we're exploring something which can bring up all kinds of things, and we want to make sure that you know that both of us are here to really, support you in whatever way you need as we explore things. So please feel free to come and see us as and when you need. And I hope that together that our softening of our hearts will take us to that place of the saint in the cemetery. We wanted to actually just take a moment to see if any of you had any questions now or anything that you wanted to share. Now.
Would you be able to share where the story is from?
The story I told, yes. That story is found in a medieval Texas called Reshit Chochmah, which means the beginning of wisdom. And it's actually a medieval Jewish text, which seems to have, because its author was living in the Middle East, seems to have absorbed a Sufi story. Because it's clearly a Sufi story, but it's taken out of a Jewish text, which is a wonderful phenomenon. And my teacher translated it out of this text. The original, I'll tell you, is about a paragraph long. And then my teacher retold it, and it got longer. And then his wife, who is a great storyteller, she retold his version, and then it got much longer. And over the years, I heard the both of them tell it in their various ways. And my version is the longest yet. And it's just because something happens when you're a storyteller and you love to tell stories, is that when you listen, you watch it on the kind of video monitor inside. And when you do that, then you see a whole series of events. And then when you retell it with the video on, it has details that you add, and you don't even know you're adding them. And so, in essence, it's exactly the same story. All the main points are right there. But it's evolved into this kind of large form. But I still have what Rebbetzin Eve's version looks like and what Reb Zalman's version looks like. But yes, a Sufi story out of a Jewish text. And I want to say something about questions. They're really important right now, and maybe you can't articulate it right now. But we kind of want to know, what are the questions about relationship, about love, about sex, about intimacy, that are personal questions? Maybe you don't have to tell us the personal circumstances, but what's really up? Because neither one of us views this as a kind of, neither one of us views this as a program. Okay, that's the external form of it. But for Deepa and I, we always feel like to have a conversation like this is a sacred ritual. And for us to just give over ideas that we have is just, it's not juicy. It has no rasa to it. That comes from the moment and from what's actually happening. And so, if you have real questions, put them somewhere. I mean, you can articulate them or you can write them down, but if we can hear them somehow or see them somehow, they'll inform what comes out. And I think the best possible experience is going to come from that. So if anything is coming up now that's real, or if you want to write it down later, please do. It can be a question for the weekend that we can explore somehow, maybe not tonight, but we can explore it.
Through my Sufi experience, I was taught that to find your partner, your wife, your human lover, could become a medium, could become a path to basically, because humanly you become able. You don't have to meditate for years and years to invoke the love of God in you. You have the love in your heart, and you can actually project it outward, and sense some of it. It's an easy way, I suppose, to reach the love of the lover. I wanted to know whether we are going to touch that within this program.
Very much. Yeah, I think it's kind of reflected in that last passage about the work of the Creator, which is that we've actually come here to live this external life and experience it, and passion, particularly the passion that we feel between two lovers, really allows us to know the Creator. So yes, we will be exploring that.
And Sufism has taken two perspectives on this. The different Sufis have said, no, when we're talking about love, we're talking about divine love, and it's something abstracted from the human situation. And then there's another school of Sufis who says, no, there's no way to get there except through relationships. And, there's no way to know divine love except to love another human being and express that love and to be in contact with that. We will take the latter approach. I have no relationship to the other.
But if you ever have the opportunity to, for example, read Hafiz,
Yes.
You would not know which kind of lover he's talking about.
Nope.
That's where we hope we'll get to. On Sunday. We won't know which lover we're talking about.
Exactly.
Each one of us has come with something that we're working with in terms of our relationships. And we might have been given it a lot of thought before we walked into this room, or it might just be something that's arising now. And I wanted to read you a poem by William Stafford, where he's talking about the thread of our lives. And in reading the poem, the question that I'm asking all of us, you've expressed what your thread might be right now, is can we name it and just sit with it for a few minutes to see, well, if I was to ask that question just out loud, what is it that my heart would say in this moment? So I'll read the poem and then you can see how it lands. The poem is called The Way It Is. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change. But it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread. But it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. Tragedies happen. People get hurt or die, and you suffer and get old. Nothing you do can stop time's unfolding. You don't ever let go of the thread. There's a thread you follow. It goes among things that change, but it doesn't change. So shall we just take a few minutes to think about what is the thread that we're following? There is a power that we know that comes in setting an intention. It's the thing that will allow the unfurling of the thread, as it were. And I've recently been doing a lot of research around the power of intention setting. And in a study that Harvard have produced, they've said that if, after you've set your intention, you share your intention, it goes up, your ability to make that intention happen goes up by nearly 85%, which is quite phenomenal, really, isn't it? Just by telling someone else, you're more likely to have that happen. So I just want you to take a few minutes and to think about the story that Netanel told us and what might still be resonating in your heart from that story. Or maybe from the words of passion, or what's been invoked by thinking about a relationship, or William Stafford's poem. And out of that to see what intention might be forming in your heart for our time together. And I invite you to share your intention with someone. It could be anyone, but share your intention with them and see what happens.
And one way to do that might be to, take a piece of paper and write it down, and even share it anonymously. Leave it somewhere.